this man with the call. Ron Darling here in our Honda Pilot-sponsored Insider Report. How are you, Ron?
I'm doing great. That was a great call by Jack Corrigan. Just imagine if you're Tony Walters. He hasn't had a hit since September 10th, and he gets that hit in the 13th, only in baseball.
You know what? It really is only in baseball. It really, really is. I mentioned that at the top of the show, Ron, is that we've seen, crazy things happen in the NFL playoffs, like David Tyree, keeping his helmet on with his football, in the Super Bowl, and we've seen NFL Super Bowl MVPs be guys that you don't expect, but baseball, it's nothing like it. Where a guy like Tony Walters, who many people have never even heard of, who hardly gets hits, let alone on the road, let alone to walk off, is the one that wins the game. It's unbelievable.
And he gets double switched in, as an afterthought, because he's always been known as a very good athletic defensive player, and he gets the big hit. It's just it's amazing, that Jack Corrigan could go straight to the greatest hit he's ever had in his life, because I don't know if he's ever had another great hit in his life before professional ball. So
what do you think, before we move on from this game to the American League, let's talk about a couple of things. Okay. What do you think about that bear hug moment between Baez and our Arenado? Is that the most bizarre thing you've seen, or what?
It's one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen. I thought it was a little ironic that Alex called it as the most bizarre thing he's ever seen. He's been involved in a couple of bizarre things with Bronson Arroyo, so I thought that was kind of ironic. But I've never seen anything like it. But I will say, as baseball has gone on, and I think in many ways, 99% of the ways, so much better. But because of many reasons, those kind of things that would be frowned upon when I played, baseball is more of a kind of a country club kind of atmosphere. The guys all like each other. They like hanging out with each other. It's more of a gentlemanly sport now. I'm sure it wouldn't have happened years ago, but that's all right too. It's unique. So anything unique is always good.
So you're saying if somebody did that with Howard Johnson, he would have gotten cold-cocked in 1986?
No, not Howard Johnson. Howard Johnson was a sweet guy. He would have fit in perfectly now. Ray Knight might have cold-cocked someone if that had happened.
So if somebody had tried that with Ray Knight, what would have happened, Ron?
Well, Eric Davis tried it in Cincinnati once, and it was a right cross, and it found its mark, and the next thing you know, we were on the Cincinnati turf for about a half hour battling it out. So, listen, you don't want to see that either.
Yes.
But the bear hug, to me, and I've completely shifted on this from a grouchy young man. I'm now a more civilized older man. I think the bat flips, the hugs, to me, it was sportsmanlike, and I think young people that are watching will find it the same.
Ron Darling here in the Honda Insider Report. So the epitaph of the 2017 Chicago Cubs would read what?
Mm-hmm. Well,
2018 Chicago Cubs would read what?
Yeah, an unrequited season. Friday of last week, they had the #1 record in the National League, and as of last night, they're not in the postseason. I think that is one of the most remarkable bad turnarounds you could ever have. And it just also goes to show how things can change. You go from Baez's magical year to all the things that happened positively, how they battled through some injuries and all those kind of things. And, baseball's endings are just so immediate that it always catches you by surprise, because you always feel like you're going to get it done. So it's just unrequited a season for them, but they've had quite a run.
And so, how good are the Rockies, do you think?
I think the Rockies are really good. I think, secondly, they have something very unique, and that is their home field is unlike any of the other 29 ballparks in baseball. I think that the thing that's been really hurting them all season ended up being one of their strengths last year, their bullpen. But, Marquez, Freeland, they're the real deal as far as starting pitchers are concerned. And the Rockies, to me, with the depth of their lineup, if they can go on one of those stretches where they start outscoring people by vast numbers, they could also make a run too, because they have a unique kind of team. And then defensively, which always is a big concern in the postseason, they're probably one of the best defensive teams in the game.
Ron Darling, he's calling tonight's American League wildcard game from Yankee Stadium here in the Honda Insider Report on the Rich Eisen Show. Okay, Ron, we talked about it throughout the year, how the Tampa Bay Rays seemed to adopt a philosophy that was unique in starting a reliever and then trying to either bring the starter in the middle of the game and go as long as you can, or bullpen their way through an entire game. And now we're seeing it in a playoff winner-go-home baseball game tonight. What do you think of the A's decision to start Liam Hendricks tonight?
Well, I think it's the right decision definitely for their ball club, because that's where their strength is. With a day off tomorrow, if they're able to get through this game, and also the strength of their club happens to be their bullpen. Their starting pitchers that they've either been injured this year or have taken off the scrap heap have done an amazing job. But their strength is their bullpen, and I think in a one-game or done scenario, I think Bob Melvin is making a great move. They're bullpenning as opposed to opening. I know for most fans they know the difference, but with the openers, there's always usually a starter who comes in and eats up, 3 and a third innings to 5 innings. But that's not going to be the case tonight. They would love Hendricks to get 1 or 2 innings, but it's really strictly going to be a bullpen. There won't be any starters that will come into the game. Edwin Jackson's on the roster, but he's only there in case we have a scenario like we saw last night. Kyle Hendricks had the end of the game for the Chicago Cubs, and if it has a typical a scenario like that tonight, then you might see Edwin Jackson in extra innings. But this will be their relievers, and if you work backwards, you got Trinan for 2, you got Familia for 2, you got Rodney for 1. So that's 5 right there. At some point, you have to get 4 innings out of a myriad of arms in that bullpen, and it'll be up to Bob Melvin to try to make those decisions.
So what do you think the Yankee strategy is tonight? What do you think Aaron Boone is doing with this, with the lineup that had the most home runs ever for a regular season?
Yeah, for Aaron, offensively, there's no strategy. I mean, literally, he has one team. And all-star quality just about at every single position. You have a former MVP who's going to be DHing, maybe one of the best players in the game in right field. Aaron Hicks has run under the radar all year. He's had an amazing year. And Duhar might be the rookie of the year. I mean, you can go on and on and on. But that lineup is the lineup that's going to play 90% of the time for Boone. So I don't think there's any matchups that he can do to match what Melvin's going to do, and that is that none of the pitchers, other than the guys at the end, Familia and Trinan, are going to face hitters more than once. So what do you do if you're an offense? I don't know. I think what you have to consider if you're the Yankee team, this is the exact thing that would happen if in the beginning of the year or the middle of the year you knocked out a starting pitcher in the first inning and the opposite team had the bullpen the rest of the game. That's how they have to consider it. It's just that kind of game.
Except in that situation, though, the team that has the bullpen for the rest of the game is in a situation they didn't want or expect. This is part of the A's strategy. Do you think this is good for baseball, Ron?
Well, I think you can only, in the postseason, can be done in these kind of wild card scenarios where you have the day off right afterwards. Is it good for baseball? I think what it does, as we saw with the Tampa Bay Rays this year, it allows teams that might not have the depth of the Dodgers or the Yankees and other teams to find fluid kind of ways to kind of try to compete. And I think that's, I don't know, I think that's a good thing. But don't forget, Tampa Bay wouldn't have been able to do what they did all season if it weren't for Blake Snell every fifth day throwing up a W and zeros, So
right. So, you're just pouring one out for some of the starters here, Ron, as a former starting pitcher. I mean, right? I mean, you guys aren't totally useless anymore, right?
I mean, I feel at times as a former starting pitcher that's the way it's going to go. But, there's always those guys that transcend any decision that any analytic department is going to make.
Right.
There's no analytic department that's going to take Max Scherzer out of a starting rotation. And for me, and I'm old enough to care about this stuff. I always still look now probably on my device, but I always still look for the pitching matchups, and if I see a good one, I always try to catch it.
Yeah, so who from that Mets pen would have been the best starter, do you think, if Davey Johnson played this type of ball?
Oh, geez, I think Roger McDowell would have been that guy, because he could easily get you 2 innings to get the ball rolling with the maybe force the other team to have the left-handed lineup, and then at some point that left-handed lineup has to face Jesse Orozco for the final 2 innings. I think that would be a good mix.
And how would you have taken the news that you weren't starting, but they were going to bullpen their way to a championship?
I would have bowled my neck in public. At private, I would have cried like a little baby.
Man, this American League is jammed too. Right? I mean, it just seems to me that the champ comes from the American League. Ron, what do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's, the pendulum goes back and forth, right? I think, all these National League teams at some point are going to see what these American League teams are doing and try to match it. I don't know how you match. Some of it's happenstance and luck. What I mean by that, when you are the Red Sox and you draft and you're looking for the best players. Every other team is doing that, but not everyone's going to end up with Betts and Benintendi and Bogarts and Bradley Jr. and on and on and on. And when you have these everyday young starting players like Houston does, like Cleveland does, like the Red Sox do, and also the Yankees to a degree, that's the way it was thought of for a while, that young starting pitching was the way to go, but the fungibility of those injuries has made that kind of not as attractive as the everyday starting player who seems to get injured less.
Last one for you, Ron Darling.
Yeah.
Last night there was a replay at second base where Daniel Murphy flipped to second to start a double play that ended the inning, and yet not a single player ran off the field because they thought that there was not an out at second base, and after further review, it was either upheld or it was confirmed. We have no idea because baseball does not make the umpires do what the NFL and the NHL does for those refs by explaining it to the crowd. Why do you think umpires either refuse to talk or Major League Baseball can't make them talk to the crowd?
Well, I don't know what their collective bargaining agreement is, but what I think should happen is that the crews should be put together, and whether it's the crew chief or not, because not everyone's comfortable talking to 50,000 people, even if they're one of the best umpires. But every crew should have one guy who has the ability to be able to let the crowd know exactly what happened on that play. I think they deserve it. They pay a lot of money to find out what's happening in these plays, and I think with all the review, with all the new rules, we've kind of convoluted the game and made it more difficult, not less difficult. And one of the ways that we could show some love for the fans is just clue them in on what the heck's going on.
Yeah.
And I think that would be much better.
All right, Ron, thanks for the call. Let's chat down the line. Enjoy that scene tonight. It's going to be a heck of a scene in the Bronx, as always.
I will, Rich. Thank you also for having me. Thank you.
Always. That's Ron Darling of Turner Sports.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.